Hi, I'm Don Wordsworth from Cyber Business Growth. I'm the Consultancy Solutions Director, and we are Computer World's partner for delivering cyber services. Welcome to my session today. The plan is to cover the five key areas, security initiatives for 2021, based on what we've seen over the last, 10 to 12 months. Working with clients, both large and small, through to the analyst data points, information coming from the NCSE, and also our own work that we do with customers to understand their direction for the future. So I guess really I can't really cover any prioritization of activity for security without talking about the impact of what we've seen over the last 10 to 12 months. And really try and base that around some of the things that we certainly saw towards the tail end of last year that were being prioritized for activity this year. Some of those things have remained, but invariably we've seen that some other priorities have had to be given more focus. So if I take that pandemic cyber timeline and try and my aim really is to, when I'm talking about some of the initiatives, really, provide some of the context behind where these have come from. For me personally, February was really the first time that I saw an NCSE bulletin which was talking about nation-state activity focused around COVID as its main theme, and really that probably, personally at the time, I hadn't really given much future thought to what was to come. Obviously, as we go through March into April, we go into security operations overload, with a massive shift to work from home, this new remote activity that we all need to deliver. But I guess by May, late May, we're really in a position where we're hearing from clients that mostly those initial hardening programs have been complete, and really they were starting to move things more into business as usual type activities. Around that time, what we saw was really the data points coming out of places like the NCSE around how we'd seen this explosion in really some of the standard activity, the phishing and malware and social engineering activities that we see, but really heightened levels of activity. And then towards the end of the summer, we see that really we're at record levels now, and that actually there's a level of sophistication that has been applied in these attacks, which are increasingly targeting home networks. And really are demonstrating some evidence, tangible evidence that some of the criminal gang and nation-state threat actors have really brought their plans forward and innovated to take advantage of the situation. The reality is, though, from a global context, is that most organisations seem to cope. I mean, in the UK, I could probably broadly put it at into three categories. There were those who were very well prepared. They had a plan that had been tested and they executed pretty well, and mostly the BAU type activities continued. There were probably another third, in my estimation, that had a plan that maybe hadn't been tested fully, and so whilst there was a fairly steady move to the new working arrangements, actually there were some adjustments that had to be made. There is a notion that potentially there's some risks being introduced, but that generally been on top of it. But then there was probably a third as well, where there was very little preparedness that had gone into this requirement, and so those guys were a bit running around with their hair on fire for a while. We all saw it, but as I say, gradually as we worked to the summer, that changed. And from a positive, we were able to see that largely organisations were able to cope with what was thrown at them. The new remote environment does create new security challenges invariably. Just because of the nature of your workforce now, not working from the confines of your office. There's a number of things that we'll talk about, or I will talk about through the session today on that. But then we also, I certainly felt it. I saw it with the organisations that we worked with, but there was a big push into providing mechanisms or tool sets for collaborating. There was massive increased use of social platforms to try and maintain business relationships and keep things going. And again, all of this stuff, really has created new threat vectors, new targets for sophisticated attackers. I think what we saw from that is that some key, talking about some themes, is that some things like identity and access need a rethink. We're not bringing people into our office anymore. Some of those old static things that we do around the way that we allow access to our critical information and our systems does need a rethink and needs to evolve. And as what we have seen is, if cloud was, that inexorable march towards cloud was happening before the pandemic, that only increased and accelerated through that period. So, we've now got increasingly users accessing their applications and their data, in a cloud at an edge. And so having our security tools sitting within our perimeter, within our office or our data center, and having that as the kind of the hop to connect to those things really doesn't look like it makes architectural sense anymore. And if we're going to talk about those things, and we're moving those things to the cloud to give us that flexible, dynamic user experience that we need to start to think about introducing some of these principles about how we manage trust in this new world, how we adapt to new risks, and how we can be more continuous in the way that we evaluate our cybersecurity. Because the reality is, through this period, cyber staff have been stretched. There's been an unprecedented workload placed upon them at in a time when there is already a big shortage of skills within the industry. Couple that with a massive spike in attacks, and the reality is, the feedback from the market seems to be that budgets are not really expanding. So we need to do things differently and achieve more, but we're still constrained by some of those kind of financial things. But also, we've definitely seen now that this kind of spotlight on cyber has definitely driven an evolution, shall we call it, in the way that things like governance, risk management, compliance, coupled with testing and assurance, are starting to be considered by those SME and kind of mid-market size companies as well. Some of those key trends that kind of backs this up, and one of the points I need to kind of make clearly is, when we look at the data, is still today, the vast bulk of those malicious intent breaches do involve some of those kind of standard things that we've been working with to solve for a number of years. It's phishing, it's credential theft, it's that social engineering and business email compromise. So these are common challenges that still persist. We're just being hit with a bit of a tsunami wave that we need to deal with. A good marker for me in terms of what has been the impact is from the stats is really insurance claims for organisations are up 30% year on year. So that says to me that these attacks are not only coming in greater numbers, but they are also being successful in higher numbers as well. Still, ransomware, that threat gets bigger. A key trend we've seen, which is accelerated through COVID, is the explosion of leak sites as an additional pressure point to an organisation. Ransomware, data. Now the threat is also that that data will also be exfiltrated and leaked to a public site as well. So not only that pressure of the business being down because they can't access things that they need, but also that potentially sensitive information is being pushed out. There's been a big kind of rise in those public leak sites through the last 10, 12 months. What we have seen on a positive note is that one of the key areas where I think a lot of work and focus has been placed over the last few years is that kind of vulnerability management programs have really evolved and matured from being kind of patch management programs into being these more end-to-end programs, which allow us to actually take pragmatic activity to defend and secure our organization off the back of the kind of the vulnerability data that we're now able to collect. And I think there's a lot of the channel, the vendors in the UK have been very successful in building kind of service programs that allow organizations to really make take some big strides in this area. It is, however, it is a moving target. It's a continuous moving target. So that certainly the feeling from larger organizations and the analysts is that this is no time to kind of hold back, and that we need to kind of still push in this area. But there's some great kind of capability that's being delivered in this area, which allows you to kind of improve that overall security maturity and protection of your organization without creating a lot of work, a lot of effort, a lot of cost for yourself within your team. The other thing that's happening is we're seeing a kind of a move to the mainstream of some of the more proactive and continuous tool sets that support some of the more point-in-time activities that we do to provide testing and assurance around our security. So breach and attack simulation, automated pen testing tools have moved just in the last couple of years from being relatively niche to actually being fairly mainstream, and we're seeing them pop up in significant numbers of clients. And this allows us to move much more to a process of continuous assessing and adapting our strategy, our approach, and the way that we defend our organisation. So this is certainly becoming more possible now with the kind of tool sets that are available in the market today. So some themes for consideration. We've been talking about opportunities potentially for creating some cyber maturity, and one of the key things that I have heard played back a few times is that I guess one of the key upsides or outcomes of this kind of period of intense effort and work that took place at the start of the year really has been that some of those hard projects that have perhaps been put on hold, in some cases for years, those things have now been done. And so it's created opportunities now to extend and enhance that capability and start to push on some of the more proactive elements of how you defend your organisation. So I'm going to talk about continuous and adaptive security. Some of these things sound like very kind of large kind of scale projects or initiatives for a large organisation, but they also have real relevance in any size company, because there are things you can do across your organisation which start to apply the principles of these things, which will invariably start to help improve what you're doing. So I'm going to talk about security governance and how we need to really bring GRC, provide it the same focus as you probably provide today your legal and financial and HR team. I want to talk about security architecture, both in terms of the technology that sits within your four walls, but also now within the home working environment, and some of the shifts that we're seeing and trends and benefits that you can seek from that. I'm going to raise mobile and IoT just because of the nature of the way that we're seeing shifts and trends in working, and some of the nature of the threats that are being targeted in this area. And I'm going to talk again in a little more detail around the notion of continuous risk and vulnerability management. I'll wrap social and kind of collaboration and digital risk together, because again, I want to come back to talk about some of the kind of the common themes that predate COVID, but really, we need to give an enhanced focus to, given where we are today. So, I think one of the key kind of things that we need to consider here is around all of this is that devices, the kind of the static way that we've been used to working is perhaps becoming more fluid. It's becoming more dynamic. Kind of the devices and applications that our users will be accessing, using, and engaging with will probably change and evolve in the next few years. So it's about putting the foundations in for controlling some of these things. So just to kind of highlight a couple of kind of key areas that we've seen, I guess, across these kind of 5 topics. Certainly what we've seen through this year, and this really builds on what we've seen over the last couple of years, is I think the kind of data privacy, heightened awareness across an organisation that's perhaps been driven by some of the things we've seen around GDPR in recent years, but now we've seen definitely a change in kind of attitude and approach from the senior leadership across a business in terms of the need to establish and manage and monitor and improve the way that they manage risk within their organisation. And so we see as a result of that we have seen a significant growth in organisations looking at how they can get independent third-party validation of where they are today, where they need to get to, and really understand the risks involved and the priorities that they need to focus on along the way. Because cybersecurity is a very fast-moving, ever-evolving landscape. And so, bringing in expertise as required to deliver against the specific kind of governance, risk management, and compliance components of a cybersecurity strategy is something that's available there to organisations of all size today. and we've definitely seen that trend. In terms of security architecture, like I say, just some of the things that we pulled out from the field is that, the way that organizations have perhaps delivered remote access in to critical data sets via VPN really has shown not to be scalable, and really kind of hasn't coped with the pressures of the new kind of remote plus working environment that we see. And the reason, the licensing doesn't scale, bandwidth, challenges have been everywhere. And really this doesn't really reflect now the way that organizations are delivering applications and data to the users anyway, because of the move to cloud. So moving things more to the edge, and then providing this increased focus on protecting that home environment, that router and that Wi-Fi and the other tools that those users will invariably plug in over time. The other thing that we see from that home working environment, which is becoming more prevalent, is the growth in shadow IT, in users sat at home in their kitchen that are more likely to use collaboration tools or cloud storage tools of their own choice or preference, simply because they're able to, and they're using their own devices, etc. So again, shadow IT is really kind of on the rise in this new working environment, and so some of those old kind of things that we've talked about for a few years around controlling access to these kind of systems, I think as we move forward, start to become potentially the minimum standard that we would expect to see when we're protecting users at home. From a mobile and IoT, and I want to talk generically about devices, because I think these are becoming a lot more generic and will become more generic over the years to come. But if we typically think about the remote workforce of last year, that would have probably been 20-30% of the workforce. It's your sales force, it's your field engineers, and they would be out in the field on the road with a device of some description, more than likely owned by the company or the organization, and that would be a corporate managed device, in the sense that it would have some kind of MDM solution, which are pretty commoditized. And in terms of other devices, perhaps we start seeing the proliferation of a few of these things in some key areas. And certainly, I would say last year there was I certainly saw a growth in the kind of the content being pushed out around the kind of the general threat of the proliferation of IoT devices that was coming. But I think now, as we see, where we are today, where users are increasingly likely to be accessing their critical systems or using their mobile devices, corporate and personally owned, to do their work as standard. A lot of those applications that sit on those devices are now becoming increasingly the targets of the threat actors with the kind of resources to be able to launch those advanced persistent threats. And what we have seen is, certainly in certain sectors, but growing kind of generally, is this notion that the IoT floodgates are open, certainly around anywhere, in healthcare. There's massive growth. For logistics, where again it's difficult to have people now perform some of these tasks. Devices are now being put in to try and smooth that process. These things connect back to networks. They're generally unmanaged, and there is a risk that is being introduced here. We see it in manufacturing as well. And my own personal prediction is, if we think about how many people are sat at home now in their kitchen or their home office, thinking about all the tools that, all the things that they would love to have in their, next year as they work remotely, that would make their life more comfortable or would make them more productive. I think certainly this year could see the kind of the floodgates opening in, or as the year of the Internet of Things in the home environment as well. So there are I think some key areas here which need some consideration. From a continuous risk and vulnerability management perspective, I think we saw an initial lull at the start of the kind of lockdown period. I think these projects were perhaps on pause for a while, but by the kind of early summer they were back with a vengeance. And I think we've seen that driven by, a real uptick in kind of service provision, where an organisation can now hand over some of these key and critical functions to a third party who can actually deliver back a better level of security, capability off the back of that. And certainly some of the, based around, the analysts really pushing, if you talked to, the analysts around their work with CISOs, they would say that this really is kind of the number, or one of the number kind of one projects for this year and next. And we're seeing a lot of the vendors repositioning themselves off the back of that. So just to kind of cap it off, I just want to kind of really talk about, look, there's been this perfect storm for exploitation. We've seen this shift in the way that some of the activity is being directed now. And, around some of these things, some of those common themes are persisting, but we are seeing some great developments in the way that we can actually start to think about how our people become a real, strong defense of our organization. So I want to talk very quickly, kind of run through each of these 5 areas in a little more detail, and just kind of talk about some of the, I guess, practical things that we would look to recommend. So when we talk about governance, risk, and compliance, really we've seen this notion now that finally, I think the things that CISOs and our clients and the folks responsible for data protection have been saying for a long time are starting to really hit home with the senior leadership in their organisations, in the sense that this stuff is not possible to deliver as a kind of a point in time exercise. It has to be, or it cannot be something that an organisation gets complacent about, because the landscape always changed, is always changing, and new threats will always evolve. So look, there's some key concerns which we kind of pick up from the market. These are probably similar to the kind of things that you guys, watching will probably be feeling today. Some of those concerns around those threats being on the rise. But what we always recommend is to try and structure your approach to delivering a measurable program of cybersecurity maturity that evolves over time. And is appropriate to where you are today as a business. So one of the key things to do, and I'd like to point you back to the NCSE website, National Cybersecurity Centre's website, because there's a whole raft of information there which will talk about how you can align yourself to an appropriate cyber framework. Now, whether that's a very simple one from NCSE, like 10 steps, or it might be more involved, like IASME governance, or looking at things like Cyber Essentials, and Essentials Plus, through to the ISO 27001. They all map to each other, but they all give you a structured approach to developing your, the way that you defend your organisation. What it allows you to do is, whether that's a very simple, kind of loose top-down structured approach that you're taking, or otherwise, it allows you to review your current state against that framework, and then develop a strategic plan for over a 12, 24, 36 month period to deliver improvements against that assessment. And you can deliver then a prioritized program of cyber maturity, and then cycle this back to reviewing and assessing and improving. So this is about starting to think about this being an ongoing, continuous process that doesn't stop in essence, but actually you can measure and track as you improve the things that you're doing. Really, from my point of view, if you're looking at this yourselves, and you're the kind of the starting point of this kind of journey in terms of where do we go from here, we always try to get organisations to think about their governance from a top-down perspective first. So think about your business landscape. Okay, you need to first of all go to the business and think about what is the strategy, where are we looking to get to as a business, how do we operate, what are our priorities now, given what's just happened? Because cybersecurity will invariably, these are digital transformation, programs that you're looking at. Cybersecurity will invariably underpin them, at some point along the way, or perhaps might be fundamental to them. You need to put that then in the context of how you operate, and the way that we would do that generally is, we need to make sure we understand fully and interview those kind of key technology and vendor management staff, so we understand what the operational landscape looks like, and then again map that into your actual capability today. So where do you stand today in terms of your ability to defend, and then map that across to things that you're mandated to do, i.e. what is that regulatory and legislative landscape that you play in, and by bringing all these three things together, we can start to form a picture of what and look at what your cyber maturity, score your cyber maturity, and what that looks like today. Because then what we can review that against and look to improve against, as I say, whether that's a very kind of entry-level framework like NCSE 10 steps through to 27K is, fundamentally these things start to look at how you are delivering the controls around these key areas for security. And at the heart of all this, what this is about is making sure that you set up and embed a risk management regime that allows you to apply the kind of the same kind of level of vigor against the risks that you see in cyber, against the risks you might see against the kind of the financial risks that you have as an organization. And if you take these kind of basic steps and you look at understanding your current state today and where you need to be against the framework of your choice, then you start to see a clear picture of and be able to prioritize the things that you need to do and make sense of those things that are going to be most important to you as an organization specifically. And that's the important thing. From a security architecture point of view, I guess the key thing, as I've mentioned here, is the notion of a perimeter where we bring people in to access their important information and perhaps bring them into our perimeter and then out back to a SaaS-based application. Really just lacks the flexibility that we need today to kind of secure the kind of assets that we have. In whether you're a small company or a very large company, your digitally enabled user is going to have information at their fingertips, and so this notion of a static monolithic perimeter really just doesn't look to make sense anymore. VPN is just not scaling to meet the demand. From a cost point of view, performance, all of these things just point to a kind of a new approach. And then how do we move to a more dynamic, flexible, contextualized approach to security? So we're definitely hearing back from customers who are looking at the long term or the mid to long term kind of outcome of where they're going to be in terms of remote working, and looking at how they provide this notion of kind of principles of zero trust. And I talk about the principles because I don't think when we talk to those customers, any of them really are talking about being able to deliver across the board 100% kind of an environment where they could fully guarantee that they were trusting nothing and verifying everything. I think that would be something that you would continually chase for till the end of time. But the notion is that actually, if we start to talk about the principles of this and start to plan and design in those principles around everything we do from this point in, that will invariably deliver a greater level of cyber control and maturity than we have today. And if we can start with identity as that one of those kind of key things, and kind of work from there, and look at how we use the kind of information that we store and keep and have access to about our users, our third parties, our customers, to provide us a level of context now that goes above and beyond what we're doing today. But there are also some more simple things which we could do today with technology that's been around for a number of years. Starting to leverage things like microsegmentation, reducing that attack surface down, really does start to help us kind of reduce down the level of trust that we have to apply to a user or somebody accessing our services. The beauty of this is that actually, from an architecture point of view, this notion of kind of zero trust and adaptive security, I guess, plays very nicely into the kind of the push that we've seen into cloud-based network security. This notion of a secure access service edge, where our security neatly dovetails in close to where the user sits, to the applications that they're accessing and the data that they're accessing, and kind of gives you that combination of that WAN capability that you have today, but with network security built in. And there are a number of pretty kind of well commoditized vendors today in this space who are delivering some great kind of tool sets that allow you to manage this kind of capability in a very simplified way. And the notion here really is that we have to probably try and look to get a kind of control over cost, reliability back to the user, performance. All of these things play into that user experience and engagement from your user, and their likelihood that they will kind of naturally follow your policies and access their applications in the way that they should. It's about making it as frictionless as possible for the user, whilst also removing the kind of the cost and effort overhead from you as an organisation. And so I think this shift now to say, let's look at how we architect our security tools that will just naturally sit within our kind of service provision or within our cloud environment near to where those users are. I've mentioned identity, but some basic things that we can do in terms of that kind of home environment that we sit in, and some basic things around moving things from passwords to passphrases, leveraging multi-factor where we can, having a look at some of the networks that our users are there, and looking at some of the software solutions now that we can maybe extend from our existing vendors, which will give us some additional controls that we might have to mandate through policy. Unfortunately, this is the nature of what we're doing today, and it's going to be finding that balance between organizational security and kind of user acceptance, I guess. Data loss, really, if we look at where that kind of data exfiltration challenge sits, really, it's about secure external, securing those collaboration channels that I guess users are increasingly working on today. They're engaging their third parties, their customers, their clients. They're transferring files, they're doing things, and so there are some really interesting things that can happen in this area. There's a new protocol that's just become available, ICAP, Internet Content Adaptation Protocol, which allows some of the vendors to apply some of the controls that you have today on your email and transferring files via email into some of these other tools. We see it them being kind of built into Teams, etc. But also, CASB is a minimum standard for controlling that shadow IT and making sure that data isn't being exfiltrated out either by accident or by the malicious use of those tools. And again, back into focus, MDM, which perhaps as a tool set, there was a rush on maybe 10 years ago, and it's been fairly commoditized since. I think there's certainly an increased interest now in extending the use of that, managing that more effectively, but also ensuring that whatever devices your users are working on, that you have end-to-end encryption, data at rest and in transit. When I talk about mobile, again, I mention this in the context of the way that we've seen the shift in the way that users are doing business and the way that they're interacting with their their colleagues and their customers, and we've seen a big adoption of these kind of social and collaboration channels, and so these attacks, the kind of the social cyber attacks are absolutely on the rise. So we need to look at how we do things like provide principles of least privilege, I guess, against some of these tool sets that we're now extending out to our employees, bringing down the control of your kind of corporate social environment, and making sure that users are aware of these kind of new threat vectors and new opportunities to accidentally exfiltrate information or leak information or be socially engineered into doing the same. So the focus on mobile, I think, really is very interconnected now with some of these new kind of social ways that we're doing business. And if you think about my ability as a threat or a bad actor to be able to take over your identity in your business social context, and communicate with your contacts, that relationship in itself, that communication has an implied level of trust, which allows me to do all sorts of other things. I can look to kind of escalate that process to a point where I'm now talking about transferring files or doing other malicious things. So there's some clear areas here that we need to certainly, harden down with policy. We need to look at how we educate our users, but we also need to probably reduce that kind of potential for error by reducing down that kind of surface of people who have access to these kind of technologies as well. From an IoT point of view, I think there is, the changes are coming. We are seeing that just this summer gone in July, the UK government actually put out draft proposals for some security standards around IoT. The challenge we have is these devices are proliferating everywhere, and device security is just not included by design. The challenge, as I think I mentioned previously, is that a firewall isn't necessarily the solution, because they're not necessarily compatible with the functionality of the device. And when you factor in the kind of the dynamic environment that we're working in today, where devices will come and go, we need to provide and we need to build in a level of visibility across the board here. Now, whether that's when I'm talking about kind of the use of mobile devices and social, or whether that's an IoT device for gathering personal health data, we need to better provide some level of visibility of those devices connecting to our networks, the information that's traversing them, and potentially. Stage 2 then is look at how we provide an element of control. The future of that, as we develop that out, is I think this is something which is going to grow over time, and we're going to see a lot more focus on this over the coming couple of years. And so tools that will then allow us to automate and orchestrate some of that stuff, so that it becomes less of a kind of a drain on our time to control these things, I think will certainly start to come to the forefront. From a continuous kind of risk and vulnerability management point of view, I've kind of covered some of these things, but our security today, if we look at most of the things that we do around a user, kind of joining our network, accessing an application, and using data, very much the security decisions that we take are very black and white. They're based on controls that we set at admin time. They're roles based. We inherently imply trust. And so we're very much making the decisions on how we deliver security based on very static kind of data, which in reality, there is a whole myriad of information that's available to us today. And we need to kind of move away from this notion of points in time thinking. Carter, which is around adaptive risk and trust, talks about, we need to look at how we continuously evaluate our users and our devices over time through their day, so that we can start to make contextual access decisions. So that could be as simple as saying, we're not just going to take, Dom's username and password and his MFA even today. We're going to make sure that we understand what his geolocation is today. We want to understand, if he's coming in at 3 o'clock in the morning and it looks like it's coming from a location that we don't know, that we're doing something about that. Today, most organizations will just accept that because, the system has my username and password and some other factor that is me. And I think today what we're seeing is, with the kind of level of sophistication that we're seeing around the threat and the attacks against home and remote working, and the way that we're going to potentially work in the coming years, is that we now need to start doing something which is taking a closer inspection, a continuous inspection of the things that we do, even to get people on our network. And then through that, the next stage from there is providing those tool sets that give us that defender advantage. So being proactive. There are a number of, as I say, tools that are coming onto the market which will allow you to surface that information on a continuous basis, monitor it proactively, mitigate the gaps that you have, and really get on the front foot. And this is really, I think, about looking at security, or the way that you make security decisions based on context and real-time security evaluation. In terms of those, I'm not going to spend too much time, and I'm sure we'll be sharing this content with you. But there's some very kind of specific things that we need to kind of think about around some of these new attack vectors. Social spear phishing is on the rise, where we talk about very targeted attacks via social platforms, where I'm going to look to take over somebody's identity and potentially over a period of time evolve some kind of fraudulent activity. Account compromise and takeover is these are some of the old challenges we've seen. Insider threats, still to this day, a significant number of breaches, financial loss is caused by the accidental or malicious activities of people who work for you. And then we're seeing a big increase in the kind of the C-level, the C-suite, the management, the owner kind of attacks. And these are coming in across these new channels. And so for all of these things, whether it's, I hesitate when companies talk about AI, but there have been some big advances in machine learning which allow us to identify some of this activity, allows us to evaluate some of these things, and allows us to then deliver a solid response, which is firstly we're going to detect the activity. We're going to provide a rapid response, and the difference between that can be the difference between your organization having an issue and being taken down, but then also providing that kind of recover and respond kind of activity, which is then how we build, how we learn from that, and how we change what we're doing so that we can avoid these things next time. As I say, there are tools that you can bring in. There are kind of things that you can adapt with what you're doing today, which will give you some clearer visibility and clearer capability in this area. So our approach really, in terms of engaging with the computer world, our first kind of, I guess, engagement with many clients is really to kind of understand that current capability and where they are today, aspirationally what they're looking to do, understand their strategies, so that we can start to talk about real world pragmatic steps that they can take to mature their security. I hope today's been really useful. In terms of that kind of next step, it would be great for you to engage with your Computer World account manager. From there, you're able to tap into a free of charge cybersecurity strategy session, which will start to ask some of these questions and really start to bring out some of this detail. And from there on in, we look forward to working with you for delivering measurable cybersecurity maturity over the coming years. I'd like to say thank you ever so much for listening. I hope it was useful and engaging, and I look forward to talking to you again in the future. Thank you.